different names, different faces, different histories, voices, promises. One arrives with warmth, another with mystery, another with an almost frightening certainty. Yet beneath these differences, the same sequence begins: fascination, pursuit, conflict, disappointment. The details change, but the emotional destination feels strangely familiar. Perhaps you have known the moment when an argument with the person before you suddenly seems older than the relationship itself. Their words are new, yet your fear already knows its lines. You defend yourself in the same way. You reach, retreat, accuse, rescue, or surrender with a precision you never consciously rehearsed. It is as if new actors have entered an old play, while somewhere beneath awareness, the scenery has remained untouched. This recognition can be unsettling because it disturbs the explanation we prefer. We ask, why do I attract these people? The question is understandable. Other people make real choices. Some may be careless, controlling, unavailable, or simply incompatible. Turning inward does not erase their responsibility, and it should never be used to excuse harm. But here is the deeper question. Who do you repeatedly become when attraction begins? Do you become indispensable? Do you become the one who waits, the one who yields, opposes, or tests? Before you know the other person clearly, does some familiar version of you step forward, already prepared for love to demand a particular performance? This is where the hidden chooser appears, not as fate, not as a diagnosis, not as proof that you possess one permanent identity. It is better understood as an archetypal expectation, a symbolic role that quietly organizes what feels compelling, recognizable, and emotionally charged. Attraction may notice the opportunity to perform that role before conscious judgment has encountered the whole person. Then repetition does not depend upon choosing identical partners. Very different people can occupy the same emotional position once the familiar relationship has begun to form around them. The pattern survives because the chooser brings more than preference into the encounter. The chooser brings a part to play. We will examine 5 such roles, not as labels for former partners, but as mirrors for the self you may become beside them. Each offers an immediate reward. Each also asks another person to carry a capacity you have not fully claimed. And after those patterns are visible, we will trace a practical path for identifying your own and interrupting it. For now, remain with the unsettling possibility. The relationship that keeps returning may be waiting not for the same face, but for the same role. What, then, is the role that seems to be waiting before the relationship has even taken shape? An archetype, in accessible terms, is a recurring symbolic form through which experience is interpreted. It does not dictate events. It gives them a familiar meaning. The names we will use are working mirrors, not canonical diagnoses, and no living person can be contained by one of them. Imagine an internal casting script that precedes conscious understanding. You meet someone whose confidence, vulnerability, remoteness, or defiance touches an image already alive within you. Before you know their contradictions, history, or actual capacity for relationship, projection begins to complete the unfinished portrait. You are not merely seeing what is there, you may also be seeing what this person could represent. But here is the crucial distinction. An archetype does not choose a person for you, as though arranging romantic destiny. It influences the role and meaning through which that person is first encountered. The actual human being may fit that meaning, resist it, exploit it, or turn out to be profoundly different from it. Often, reality becomes visible only after the symbolic charge has already drawn you closer. And these roles rarely appear alone. They call forth their complement. The healer requires someone whose wound can organize the bond. The seeker requires distance across which longing can travel. The rebel requires an authority against whom freedom can be declared. Either partner may resist the assigned part, and the roles may even exchange places over time. Yet the pairing persists because each position gives the other its emotional purpose. This is why chemistry and compatibility must not be confused. Intensity can announce familiarity, fantasy, danger, possibility, or several of these at once. It can feel like recognition without proving that two people can tell the truth, repair conflict, honor boundaries, or build a life together. A powerful beginning is information. It is not a verdict. Do not use this framework to explain away cruelty. Do not remain in danger, because suffering appears psychologically meaningful. Do not reduce another person to a symbol, as if their choices and complexity were merely material for your transformation. Symbolic reflection is useful only when it preserves reality, responsibility, uncertainty, and safety. As the 5 patterns unfold, listen for more than the role that sounds elegant. Listen for the one that produces recognition and resistance together. Ask what you repeatedly do, what immediate reward you receive, and what the performance costs. The least flattering mirror may contain the clearest information. The first mirror begins with a bargain that can easily resemble devotion. If I become necessary to your healing, perhaps I will never have to wonder whether I am loved. You had plans for the evening, or perhaps only the quiet intention to rest. Then the call comes. A crisis has opened in someone else's life, and within moments your own needs disappear from view. You cancel, drive across town, remain awake, listen, advise, soothe, arrange. Exhaustion may be present, even irritation, but beneath it lies another feeling: importance. For these few hours, there can be no doubt that you matter. Care itself is not the problem. Human beings depend upon one another, and love naturally includes sacrifice. Freely given care can respond to suffering without requiring suffering to continue. The healer bargain is different. Here, usefulness becomes the admission price for belonging. You do not simply help a person you love, you need the relationship to contain a problem that makes your place secure. This is why visible potential can become so magnetic. You may be drawn toward the unfinished life, the perpetual emergency, the person whose pain seems to conceal an extraordinary self that only sufficient patience will awaken. Their promises become evidence of who they might become, while their repeated actions are treated as temporary obstacles. Love begins to resemble a long vigil beside a locked door, sustained by the conviction that devotion will eventually cause it to open. But the hidden reward is not only hope, it is indispensability. If another person relies upon your steadiness, insight, forgiveness, or labor, you can postpone a more frightening question: would I still be chosen if I were not solving anything? To receive love without earning it through rescue may feel strangely exposed. There is no task to perform, no emergency to justify your place, only the vulnerability of being known and freely met. Sooner or later, resentment reveals the bargain. Perhaps the other person does not change, and your sacrifices begin to feel wasted. Perhaps they do change, but no longer need you in the same way, and their recovery feels disturbingly like abandonment. Or perhaps they accept the arrangement exactly as offered and continue expecting endless care, while you rage inwardly at the burden you once made central to the bond. Have calm, capable, reciprocal partners ever seemed less compelling because nothing in them required your intervention? Did their availability feel flat, not because they lacked depth, but because they offered no urgent role through which you could prove your worth? This does not make a struggling partner guilty for being in pain, nor does it make every act of devotion manipulative. The decisive question belongs closer to home. Why must another person's wound become your qualification for love? And if no one needed saving, who would you be beside them? The healer pursues a wound. The next role pursues something farther away, a horizon that remains beautiful because it never quite comes near. The message remains unread. The status of the relationship is uncertain. Affection arrives warmly, then disappears without explanation. Or perhaps the person lives far away, encountered only in compressed intervals that never become ordinary life. Yet they occupy more of your inner world than someone who appears consistently, answers clearly, and stands before you without a veil. This is the second role, the seeker. What draws the seeker is not merely a person, but the space between them. Into that space, imagination pours possibility. A few intimate exchanges suggest profound understanding. A rare gesture acquires enormous meaning. Everything still unknown can be completed, according to desire, until the beloved seems larger, deeper, and more fated than any actual human being could remain under the steady light of daily contact. The feeling may be sincere. Longing can contain tenderness, erotic force, grief, and genuine recognition. But longing is not identical to love. It can preserve devotion while postponing the conditions love eventually requires: exposure, negotiation, repetition, disappointment, boredom, and mutual dependence. You can ache for someone who is absent, without discovering how the two of you handle ordinary mornings, conflicting needs, or the unsettling experience of being fully seen. Then a cycle forms. Distance intensifies desire. A brief return brings relief so powerful that it resembles proof. But when closeness becomes sustained, something changes. The fascination weakens, irritations sharpen, or another obstacle suddenly becomes decisive. Perhaps you begin doubting what you fought so hard to obtain. The seeker needs movement toward the beloved. A rival threatens the identity built around seeking. Have you noticed desire rising most fiercely when certainty is withdrawn? Does a delayed reply awaken more feeling than a clear declaration? Have you ever wanted desperately to be chosen, only to feel confined, restless, or strangely disappointed once another person became reliably available? Here is the uneasy revelation. Ambiguity may protect you. While the relationship remains incomplete, your imagined self can remain intact within it. You need not reveal all your limitations, state every need, or risk discovering that neither of you can sustain what the fantasy promised. The veiled beloved remains luminous because distance protects the imagined relationship from the limits of an actual one. None of this excuses deception, neglect, or manipulative inconsistency. An unavailable person remains responsible for what they offer, conceal, and withdraw. But their conduct does not answer the inward question: what reward do you receive from continuing the pursuit? Perhaps you have assigned them the capacity for mystery and freedom, while keeping for yourself the safer position of devotion without possession. The healer avoids uncertainty by becoming necessary. The seeker turns uncertainty into desire. But the next role escapes it differently. By surrendering choice to someone who appears certain enough for two, there is a particular relief in hearing another person say, "I've decided." They choose where you will eat, bring the argument to a conclusion, organize the coming months, and announce what should happen next. For a moment, the exhausting burden of uncertainty falls silent. You need only agree, follow, and be held inside a direction that someone else appears strong enough to provide. This is the child before the sovereign. It does not begin with obvious domination. Often, it begins with admiration. The sovereign seems unusually composed, worldly, disciplined, capable of entering confusion and producing order. Their approval may feel like legitimacy itself, as though being chosen by such a person confirms that your own life is finally becoming real. Competence is not cruelty. Decisiveness is not control. Every partnership includes reliance, and responsibilities may be divided freely according to ability, circumstance, and preference. The pattern emerges when support becomes substitution, when you repeatedly exchange participation in your own life for shelter, permission, or approval. At first, the bargain feels merciful. They know what to do. You are spared the risk of choosing wrongly. But each surrendered decision quietly enlarges their authority. What begins with small preferences can reach friendships, work, money, boundaries, even the interpretation of your own feelings. Eventually, the certainty you borrowed begins to feel like confinement. Then admiration reverses. You accuse them of deciding everything, yet struggle to name the desires you withheld. You resent their power, yet feel abandoned when they stop directing you. The child seeks protection from uncertainty, then experiences that borrowed certainty as a prison. Have you ever asked, "Is it all right if I..." when what you meant was, "This is what I want"? Have you waited for permission, concealed your preference, and later blamed another person for holding authority you never openly challenged? These questions do not excuse coercion. A controlling partner remains responsible for intimidation, restriction, and disregard. But responsibility for their conduct does not eliminate the need to examine where your own voice disappeared. And the arrangement is rarely as simple as one powerful person and one powerless person. Helplessness can become a quiet form of control. If you refuse to choose, the other must carry every consequence. The supposed sovereign may become anxious, exhausted, or dependent upon obedience, because being obeyed protects them from confronting their own uncertainty. The child needs direction. The sovereign needs to remain unquestioned. Each keeps the other inside the role. The developmental task is not to reject care, guidance, or interdependence. It is to participate, to state a preference before requesting approval, to make a decision whose outcome cannot be assigned to someone else, to receive support without surrendering authorship. But when ceded authority has accumulated long enough, reclaiming it may first appear not as mature participation, but as fury. The child who feels imprisoned often awakens as the rebel, and suddenly freedom seems possible only when there is someone to resist. Perhaps the attraction begins with a prohibition. Someone disapproves. The circumstances are forbidden, the differences provocative, the relationship charged by the sense that choosing each other proves no rule can contain you. Every objection intensifies desire. Love feels vivid because it is also a declaration. No one will tell me how to live. This is the rebel before the judge. The judge may appear as a partner who guards propriety, defines what is reasonable, or continually measures behavior against an invisible standard. They become the gatekeeper whose refusal gives the rebel something to break through. Yet the deeper dependence is easy to miss. The rebel seems fiercely independent, but requires opposition in order to experience that independence. Then ordinary limits acquire symbolic weight. A request for punctuality sounds like domination. A need for privacy becomes rejection. A disagreement about responsibility is heard as an attempt to suppress the self. Instead of asking what this particular boundary means, the rebel responds to every limit as if an ancient authority has returned wearing a new face. Testing begins. A promise is broken to prove that promises cannot imprison. A sensitive subject is deliberately provoked. A reasonable request is refused with unnecessary force. The rebel invites criticism, and when criticism arrives, it confirms the expectation. There, you see, another person trying to control me. But here is the self-reinforcing movement. The more one partner defies, the more the other may monitor, lecture, restrict, or punish. The more the judge tightens, the more righteous the rebel's resistance feels. Each becomes evidence for the other. One says, "I must impose order because you are irresponsible." The other says, "I must violate your order because you are oppressive." Conflict becomes the stage on which both secure a familiar identity. Have you ever felt strangely diminished when an argument ended peacefully? Has attraction weakened when no prohibition remained, no convention needed shocking, no authority stood between you and your desire? Without resistance, did freedom feel less like freedom and more like not knowing who you were? This recognition must never be used to romanticize coercion. Intimidation, isolation, threats, and abuse are not sacred obstacles placed in your path for growth. Resistance to actual control may be necessary for safety. The inward question begins only where choice remains possible. Do you sometimes recruit opposition, amplify disagreement, or remain attached to a judge because defiance gives you form? The hidden task is to develop an authority within yourself, values you choose, limits you can honor, commitments you can make without experiencing them as capture. Then freedom no longer requires defeating someone. It becomes the capacity to act without either obedience or reflexive refusal. Yet when conflict has been the proof of aliveness, peace exposes something more vulnerable. If there is no battle to hold the relationship together, will the other person still remain? Beneath the rebel's fury, another role is already waiting, the one who expects abandonment and demands reassurance through a trial. A quieter disturbance begins it. A reply comes later than expected. A familiar voice carries some altered note. Nothing has yet been decided, but inside, a courtroom assembles. Memory presents its evidence. Fear assumes the bench, and the person you love is summoned to prove a future no human being can guarantee, that they will never change, never turn away, never disappear. This is the abandoned one, and the trial can take many forms. You withdraw, hoping pursuit will reveal devotion. You compare today's affection with yesterday's and demand an explanation for every difference. You ask for certainty beyond what honesty can provide, conceal a need so that its discovery will count as proof, or choose chronically inconsistent people whose behavior keeps the oldest fear continually awake. Not every anxious response is a calculation, and many tests are enacted without conscious intent. Yet their emotional logic is severe. If you can force the verdict, perhaps you will no longer be helpless before it. The loyalty test promises protection. Its deeper function may be to make an old ending arrive on familiar terms, painful but recognizable, devastating but no longer unstructured. That is the concealed reward. Familiar pain can feel more manageable than trust because trust contains no final guarantee. It asks you to remain present while the future stays open. The abandoned one would rather know the sentence than wait without one, even if knowing requires provoking distance, disqualifying reassurance, or remaining attached to someone who repeatedly disappears. And this is why steadiness may initially feel suspicious. A consistent partner offers no crisis through which love can be measured. Their affection may seem emotionally flat, almost unbelievable, as if the absence of alarm means the absence of depth. Stability does not immediately soothe the old expectation, because stability speaks a language the role has not yet learned to hear. Have you ever asked for reassurance and then found a reason it did not count? Were you seeking comfort that could actually be received, or collecting evidence for a verdict already written? If every answer is cross-examined, the trial is not discovering the future, it is arranging it. But fear does not invent every danger. Neglect, deception, inconsistency, and betrayal are real actions, and responsibility remains with the person who chooses them. To examine your pattern is not to deny evidence, excuse harm, or remain where trust is repeatedly violated. Compassion for the wound must never become a command to abandon discernment. The task, then, is not blind trust. It is to state the need without disguising it as a test, evaluate conduct across time, and tolerate the uncertainty that remains after honest evidence has been considered. The partner can offer reliability, but cannot carry your entire capacity for inner security. And here, the 5 roles converge. Each has asked another person to embody something the chooser has not yet permitted themselves to hold. Seen together, the 5 roles reveal not 5 fixed personalities, but 5 bargains. The healer secures belonging through usefulness. The seeker preserves desire through longing. The child receives shelter by yielding authorship. The rebel finds identity through opposition. The abandoned one exchanges open uncertainty for the promise of certainty. Each bargain solves an immediate emotional problem. Each also narrows the self. What has been excluded enters the shadow. This does not mean merely what is shameful, destructive, or evil. The shadow includes any human capacity the conscious identity cannot admit as its own. Need, strength, dependence, authority, appetite, tenderness, even the ability to remain present when nothing dramatic is happening. What you forbid in yourself does not vanish. It often returns through fascination with, fear of, or conflict with another person. The healer may exile personal need, then organize love around someone permitted to need without limit. The seeker may surrender ordinary presence, asking the distant beloved to carry mystery while daily intimacy feels unbearably plain. The child may disown authority and experience the partner as the only one entitled to decide. The rebel may reject legitimate dependence, forcing every bond to prove that reliance is captivity. The abandoned one may conceal direct vulnerability, requiring another person to supply certainty instead of plainly risking, "I am afraid, and I want reassurance." This is why certain emotions deserve investigation. Jealousy may point toward a freedom you have denied yourself. Anger may reveal an unclaimed boundary. Fascination may gather around a quality awaiting development. Disproportionate irritation may signal a need or impulse you cannot tolerate seeing nearby. But none of these feelings is conclusive proof. Emotion opens an inquiry. It does not settle one. Imagine a casting director distributing everything one character refuses to carry. One actor receives all the strength, another all the chaos, freedom, need, or cruelty. Soon they no longer encounter each other as complicated people. Each appears enormous, because each has been assigned more than a human share of the drama. And roles can reverse without changing the underlying arrangement. The tireless healer may collapse and demand rescue. The apparently powerless child may control everyone through helplessness. The abandoned one may leave first, becoming the very figure whose departure was feared. Surface positions change, the excluded capacity still governs the bond. Reclaiming that capacity does not mean imitating another person's worst behavior. It means allowing yourself a mature form of what was forbidden, to need without making need a claim upon someone, to exercise authority without domination, to depend without surrender, to remain present without manufacturing distance, to speak fear without arranging a test. As these qualities return to the self, compulsory casting loses some of its power. Yet this does not guarantee that a particular relationship should continue. Greater ownership may deepen a viable bond, reveal incompatibility, or clarify that safety requires departure. Integration restores choice. It does not dictate the outcome. So the next question is no longer, which label am I? Ask instead, what scene repeats? What do I keep doing? What is the immediate payoff? And what human capacity do I repeatedly make another person carry for me? How do you answer those 4 questions without turning them into another elegant theory about yourself? Begin with 3 significant attractions. Remove the names, faces, occupations, and circumstances. Write only what kept happening between you. Were you pursuing, rescuing, requesting permission, resisting, or testing? When the personal details disappear, the recurring scene becomes easier to see. Second, replace adjectives with verbs. Cold, controlling, and toxic may express pain, but they can conceal the sequence that produced it. What did the other person repeatedly do? What did you do next? Did they withdraw while you pursued? Did they decide while you yielded? Did they criticize while you defied? This is not an attempt to divide blame equally. It is a way of locating your participation precisely enough to change it. The role appears in action, not in a flattering description. Third, name the reward before the cost. This may be the most unsettling movement because the reward explains why insight alone has not ended the pattern. For a moment, did you feel necessary, intensely alive, protected from uncertainty, free because someone opposed you, or certain that the loss you feared was finally coming? Do not shame the reward. See it clearly. What is condemned goes underground. What is understood can become a choice. Fourth, identify what the other person has been carrying for you. Then formulate a sentence of reclamation. I can have needs. I can remain present. I can decide. I can set limits. I can ask directly. The sentence should feel slightly difficult to believe. Otherwise, it may describe a capacity you already possess rather than the one your role has displaced. Fifth, make one modest, contrary move. Decline a rescue that is neither necessary nor freely chosen. Let an unanswered message remain unanswered without composing an explanation for it. Make one decision and accept its consequences. State a boundary without creating a confrontation around it. Ask for reassurance without disguising the request as an ordeal the other person must pass. Then, observe what follows inside you and between you. But add one indispensable test of reality. Is the other person consistent? Is consent respected? Is care reciprocal? Are you safe? What do their actual choices show across time? Archetypal reflection must sharpen discernment, never replace it. Your pattern does not make another person's harmful conduct imaginary, and understanding your role does not require remaining available for harm. Now comes the final difficulty. A contrary action may initially feel selfish, empty, anxious, or strangely lifeless. That discomfort does not automatically mean the action is wrong. It may mean the old reward has not arrived. Recognizing the script is easier than inhabiting a bond in which your familiar character is no longer required. The deepest test is whether you can remain long enough to meet what appears when the performance stops. What appears when the performance stops? At first, not peace, but uncertainty. The face may change because the casting has changed, yet the relationship changes only when you no longer arrive, demanding the same part. Otherwise, a new person enters and is quietly fitted to an old expectation, while you resume the identity through which love has always become recognizable. Transformation begins in the contrary movement. The healer allows care to travel in both directions and discovers that being loved is not the same as being indispensable. The seeker remains near enough for imagination to yield to knowledge. The child chooses, speaks, and accepts responsibility without refusing support. The rebel forms an inner authority strong enough to make commitment voluntary rather than oppressive. The abandoned one asks plainly for reassurance, receives what is honestly offered, and judges evidence without forcing fear's conclusion. But do not expect these movements to feel immediately liberating. Relinquishing the role may feel like losing chemistry, virtue, protection, freedom, or preparedness. A relationship without emergency may seem dull, Presence may seem less intoxicating than distance. Agency may feel lonely. Peace may resemble submission. Trust may seem dangerously unguarded. You may be tempted to call the unfamiliar emptiness and return to the intensity you understand. This is the decisive challenge. Can you encounter another person before assigning them a wound, a veil, a crown, a gavel, or a departure? Can they be generous without becoming your salvation? Decisive without becoming your ruler? Imperfect without becoming your betrayer? Can you allow them complexity while carrying your own need, presence, authority, dependence, and fear? What role has love required you to play? What capacity have you made your partners carry? Who might you become if love no longer demanded that performance? Watch for the next instant of casting. It may arise during attraction, silence, disagreement, tenderness, or uncertainty. Notice the old instruction before obeying it. Then choose one honest action beyond it. Reveal the need, remain in contact with reality, make the decision, honor the limit, or ask the question whose answer you cannot control. Courage here is not certainty about the outcome. It is responsibility for how you enter it. And remember, transformation does not require staying in an unsafe or incompatible relationship. Self-awareness cannot make another person trustworthy, create reciprocity, or guarantee that any partnership will endure. It restores the ability to see and choose. Freedom in love begins when neither person must become a character for the other to feel whole. Then, the next phase need not announce the return of the same relationship. It may become what repetition never allowed, a meeting between two people, each more fully present, each more fully human.